The night was colder than usual. Streetlights flickered over cracked sidewalks as a thin man, wrapped in an old gray blanket, sat beside a small campfire made of cardboard and scraps. Beside him, curled against his leg, was a brown dog, thin, trembling but fiercely loyal. The man called him Max. For years, Jake had lived on these streets. Once, he had a life, a job, a small apartment, even a fiancée. But one wrong turn, one bad deal, and everything vanished. The only thing that stayed was Max, the stray who wandered into Jake's life on a rainy night and refused to leave. "We're all right, buddy," Jake whispered, rubbing Max's head as his breath misted in the cold air. Max lifted his eyes, tail wagging faintly, as if to say, as long as we're together, that night, something would happen that neither of them could ever forget. It began with the sound of tires skidding. Across the street, a black luxury car lost control on the icy road and slammed into a lamppost. The crash echoed through the empty streets. Jake jumped to his feet. Max barked, alert, already running toward the sound. "Wait, Max!" Jake shouted, stumbling after him. Inside the car, smoke began to rise from under the hood. The driver, a middle-aged man in an expensive suit, was slumped over the wheel, bleeding from his forehead. His name was Daniel Rivers, a self-made millionaire, the kind who thought fate bowed to willpower. Jake reached the car and tried to open the door, but it was jammed. "Sir, can you hear me?" he yelled, coughing as smoke filled the air. The man stirred but didn't respond. The fire under the hood grew. Max barked louder, scratching at the car door, refusing to back away from the heat. Jake gritted his teeth. "We can't leave him, Max." He grabbed a rock, smashed the window, and reached in to pull the door open. The heat singed his arm, but he didn't stop. He hooked his hands under Daniel's shoulders and dragged him out, coughing, both of them collapsing onto the icy ground. Then Jake heard it. A faint click, followed by a burst of orange light. The car exploded. The blast threw them back. Jake's ears rang, and the world blurred into smoke and ringing metal. He tried to stand, but his legs gave out. Max whimpered beside him, nudging Jake's face, as if begging him to stay awake. "We did it, buddy, we did it," Jake murmured before everything went dark. When Jake woke up, everything was white. The smell of antiseptic burned his nose. His arm was bandaged, and a nurse hovered nearby. "You're awake," she said softly. "You're lucky to be alive." Jake tried to sit up. "Where's Max? The dog, where is he?" The nurse smiled. "He's safe. He hasn't left your side since they brought you in." Through the glass door, Jake saw Max sleeping on the floor beside the bed, his head resting on his paws. Relief washed over him. For a man who had nothing, Max was everything. Moments later, the door opened again, and in walked Daniel Rivers, the man from the crash. His forehead was stitched, his suit replaced by hospital clothes. He stopped, staring at Jake for a long moment. You saved my life," Daniel said quietly. Jake shrugged weakly. Anyone would have done the same. Daniel shook his head. "No, they wouldn't have." He knelt beside Max, gently scratching behind his ear. Max wagged his tail, looking up at him with that same loyal gaze. "This dog of yours," Daniel said softly, "he jumped right at the fire before you did. He kept barking until people came." Jake smiled faintly. "Yeah, he's got more courage than I ever did." There was a pause, a kind of silence that hums before something changes. Daniel studied the frail man before him, the patched clothes, the eyes that had seen too much. "You live on the street?" he finally asked. Jake nodded slowly. "Me and Max been that way a while." Daniel didn't respond right away. He just looked at them, the man and his dog, survivors bound by nothing but love and hunger and hope. Then he said, almost to himself, "You saved me. Now it's my turn." Jake frowned. "What do you mean?" Daniel just gave a small, knowing smile. "You'll see." Outside, the city carried on as if nothing had happened. But for these three souls, the world had already shifted. And neither Jake nor Max could guess how deeply that single act of courage would change their lives forever. Days passed. Jake was released from the hospital, his arms still weak but healing. He and Max walked out into the sunlight, the same streets they knew so well. Except this time, something felt different. A sleek black car waited at the curb. Daniel Rivers leaned against it, sunglasses on, but his face carried a softness Jake hadn't seen before. "Get in," Daniel said with a half-smile. "I owe you lunch." Jake hesitated. "I don't think you're a kind of place lets guys like me in." Daniel chuckled. "I own the place." Max wagged his tail, sensing something good. Jake sighed and climbed in. The car's leather smelled like another world, clean, rich, untouched by dust. For the first time in years, Jake felt the warmth of a seat instead of the chill of concrete. At the restaurant, people turned to stare. A homeless man in a worn coat, his dog at his feet, and a millionaire in tailor clothes. Daniel didn't seem to care. He ordered 2 full plates of steak and a bowl of water for Max. When the food arrived, Jake stared in disbelief. "Eat," Daniel said. "You earned it." Jake cut into the steak, slowly, almost reverently. "Haven't had a real meal since I can't even remember." For a moment, Daniel just watched this man who had risked his life for him, without knowing who he was or what he was worth. Then Daniel said quietly, "You saved me without hesitation." "Why?" Jake looked up. "Because no one else would. And I know what it feels like to be left behind." The words landed hard. Daniel leaned back, silent. The clinking of cutlery around them faded. Something in him shifted. A realization that all his money, all his success, had never bought what this man carried in his heart. Over the next few weeks, Daniel couldn't get Jake and Max out of his mind. He started visiting them, bringing food, sometimes just sitting with them. He learned that Jake used to be a mechanic, skilled, hard-working, but life had taken a cruel turn. An injury, hospital bills, the job loss that followed. The spiral had been fast and unforgiving. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the skyline, Daniel said, "I have a proposition. Come work for me. I'm restoring classic cars. I could use someone who actually knows engines." Jake froze. "You're serious?" "Dead serious. You saved my life, Jake. Let me help you rebuild yours." Tears stung Jake's eyes, but he hid them behind a shaky smile. Max barked softly, as if urging him to accept. Jake looked at Daniel for a long time, then nodded. "All right, but only if Max comes too." Daniel laughed. "That's non-negotiable. He's your partner." Weeks turned into months. Jake worked harder than anyone in Daniel's garage. He showed up early, stayed late, and never complained. Max became the shop's mascot, always wagging his tail, watching Jake with proud eyes. Customers loved him. The place felt alive. One morning, Daniel walked in holding an envelope. "Jake, can we talk?" Jake wiped his hands and came over. "What's up?" Daniel handed him the envelope. Inside were house keys and a deed. Jake blinked, confused. "What's this?" "A home," Daniel said softly. "You and Max deserve more than a garage floor. It's already paid for." Jake stared at him, speechless. His throat tightened. I can't accept this." "Yes, you can," Daniel insisted. "You saved my life. This isn't charity. It's gratitude." For a long moment, Jake just stood there, tears welling in his eyes. He looked down at Max, who nudged his hand as if to say, "It's okay, we made it." Jake finally whispered, "Thank you for everything." Daniel smiled. "You already thanked me the night you pulled me out of that car." But life, as always, had one more turn waiting. That winter, a storm hit the city, the worst in a decade. Roads flooded, power lines fell, and chaos ruled the streets. Jake was at home with Max, watching the news when the screen flickered. Reports came in about trapped families in the industrial district, the same area Daniel's warehouse was in. Jake's heart sank. Without thinking twice, he grabbed his jacket and keys. Max barked, ready to go. "Let's move, boy." Snow pounded the windshield as they drove through the storm. The warehouse loomed ahead, lights flickering. Jake kicked the door open and yelled, "Daniel!" But the wind swallowed his voice. He heard a faint shout, then another, and then silence. He followed the sound until he found Daniel pinned under a beam, blood running down his temple. "Jake!" Daniel gasped. "Leave me. The roof's coming down." Jake shook his head fiercely. "Not a chance. You didn't leave me. I'm not leaving you." The structure groaned, with splintering overhead. Max barked and began tugging at Daniel's sleeve, desperate to help. Jake strained, muscles trembling, until finally the beam shifted. He pulled Daniel free just as part of the roof collapsed behind him. Snow and ash filled the air as they stumbled outside, alive, shaking, and covered in soot. Daniel looked at Jake through the haze, voice breaking. "You saved me again." Jake smiled weakly. "Guess we're even now." But they both knew some debts go deeper than balance. As the storm settled and the first light of dawn broke through the clouds, Jake looked down at Max, who sat between them, loyal,